Welcome to Global Investment Voice, where we explore investment migration issues and opportunities from around the world. With a special focus on the U.S. EB-5 Immigrant Investor Program, we'll also cover citizenship and residency by investment programs from around the globe. If you're an investor, fund manager, developer, or enterprising entrepreneur and want to get the most out of these global investment migration programs, you have come to the right place. I'm Mark Deal, and I'll be your co-host on this journey. I'm joined by your host attorneys Mona Shaw and Rebecca Singh, as well as other investment migration leaders from around the world. So let's get into Global Investment Voice.
You know, Mona, Mark, as President Trump continues to broaden his crackdown on illegal immigration, we now see that focus has expanded to legal immigrants and tourists. So I think as a lot of our listeners and us ourselves have seen over the past few weeks, there has been numerous instances of visitors, visa holders, even green card holders being turned away or even being detained at the U.S. Customs and Border. Mona, is this becoming a norm?
Yeah, it's a chilling effect, really, isn't it? And I think what I'd like to start by saying for everyone is that I know there's been a lot of media hype, and we'll get into that. But relatively, if you look at the numbers of people coming into the US, if they are still coming into the US, that is, and green card holders being turned away or detained, and visitors being detained, it is rare. It's not that many in comparison to the amount of people coming in. So take some of the media reports with a grain of salt. But saying that, Rebecca, travel issues are real. We are seeing that international visitors are reporting more stringent passport inspections. There's warrantless searches. There's questioning at the border. It goes on.
Yeah, we don't want anyone to get scared and not to enter the U.S. But at the same time, just be mindful of what's happening. I mean, Mona, I told you this when I was entering the U.S. I'm a U.S. passport holder, right? Born and raised here.
Mark, Rebecca's in New York right now. She's not in the UK.
Yeah, but it was surprising. There are separate lines for obviously those who are international or who do not hold a green card or a U.S. passport. There's a separate line for those. And then I was surprised that when I was in line, they started separating the U.S. citizens or passport holders from those who held the green card or who are legal permanent residents. I found that very surprising.
Well, that I haven't seen for many, many, many years. I don't remember. It's always been one line for U.S. passport holders and green card holders. But also, this is the first time ever in our history that countries like Germany, UK, Canada are actually giving travel warnings for the US. When we were putting together this podcast, Mark, we reached out to some of our colleagues to see if they had any nuggets to share with us. And one of our colleagues wrote back and said, I have one line. I said, yes. He said, first and only nugget, don't travel unless critically important. Wow.
Yeah, but that's so difficult. The U.S. is such a tourist attraction. There's business happening. What do we say to that?
Well, people still have to come in. They're coming in. I mean, we are seeing, apparently travel is down less, but we are still seeing travel. But there is a markedly less amount of people coming in from, our friends from the north are not coming over.
Yeah.
The Canadians.
Plenty of stories from that as well. Throughout the podcast, we're going to give our thoughts and advice on these issues relating to those who are visitors, those who actually hold a visa, non-immigrant visas, and then also those who hold the green card. What advice do we have for everyone? But at this point, Mona, I think we've seen a lot of executive actions happening under the current administration. And we see this effort, they want to broaden and tighten immigration policies.
Yeah.
There's concerns for national security, but it just seemed like this happened almost overnight.
Well, it really didn't. It's just that it's been super tightened overnight. Many of the checks and balances have been there forever. If, for example, you have a criminal conviction, it might be 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever, you are still questioned on that. I'm talking pre-Trump. You are still questioned on that. It's just that right now there is like a zero policy. Everything is super scrutinized. And I will say, I do feel like this administration is going that little bit too far. As I said, our friends from the North don't want to come and visit us anymore. Our Canadian friends from the North.
Yeah, it just seems that, is it really the Custom and Border? Are they abusing their discretion, or has travelers in the past abused the U.S. laws? Have we been sitting back on it and just allowing anyone in?
Yeah, that's the very good point, Rebecca. And I think that it's good for people to understand where the US is coming from. Yeah, it seems very stringent and kind of science fictional ridiculous that we are going through all of this. But quite frankly, some of the tactics which were put in that the Trump administration are using were actually put in under the Biden administration. We are seeing more aggressive tactics at the port of entry, but they are as a response to certain abuses. So let me give you some examples of some of these abuses. There have been now for many years pregnant women in their 7th month coming into the US, giving birth to their child who then becomes a US citizen, something that Trump is really adamant against. But the abuse here is not only that they're just coming in to give birth to a US citizen, but the fact that they're not paying for their medical treatment and they're using the free services and whatever, so that we as a taxpayer are all paying for it. And the people who are not taxpayers and are visitors are coming in and getting all of this done for free. So that's one abuse.
Yeah, Simona, in addition to that as well, I think and we've seen this, we've got a lot of clients who come to us and say, oh, I could get Canadian citizenship and then automatically be able to enter the US, thinking it's easy access or it's a right away to the US, without realizing that, yeah, Canada has a bit more freedom of travel, but there's still some regulations.
I know, you said to me, right, when at the beginning of this, you said, isn't Canada our friend? Yeah, it is our friend, but unfortunately, we have seen more abuse coming in from Canada than we've seen from anywhere else. And I say that as an immigration attorney doing this in this country for almost 30 years. We see people getting Canadian immigration and using it as a right of entry to live and work in the US. People just using the ability to be able to just walk across the border to come in. And I can see why the Trump administration is really coming down hard on Canadians. They're definitely coming down harder on snowbirds, and I think they're coming harder on Canadians coming in to make sure that they're not coming here to live and work. Again, it's just another abuse. And a third abuse, which we will talk about, which we're seeing a lot, is the fact that people who have a green card are using their green cards as a multi-entry visa. And we'll go into this in more detail, but this is one of the elements, again, that the Trump administration is cracking down on.
Again, it's nothing new. That's what I think everyone has to understand. Yeah. It's been more laxed, and now the Trump administration is just doing more scrutiny.
Yeah, it's like, as I said, but under the Biden administration, people were getting their visas canceled if they had come in the past to give birth, So the Trump administration's just going one step further.
Just going one, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But anyway, let's give our listeners some advice that we are hearing from and what we're seeing from CBP. And I will say this, I've read this on more than one place, and it was actually in one of our industry seminars that a person from CBP came on and said they're not enjoying what's going on. So I know they're miserable, and you try to smile at them, and they're even more miserable, but apparently they aren't relishing, misery.
Well, it's more work to them, isn't it?
All right. So, Rebecca, what is the first piece of advice you'd give to someone, say, who is just a visitor or coming in on a non-immigrant visa?
I thought it wasn't common, but supposedly this is common, that a lot of travelers coming in don't actually know what visa they're coming in.
Oh, yeah, that's true. So, that's actually very, very true. So I think the first advice I would say is know the details of your visa. Just recently, we were confronted with a whole bunch of people who were coming in as musicians and entertainers, and they had no idea what visa their agent had got for them.
Well, that's what I would say, is that their agents are obtaining the visas for them, doing the runaround. Artists, athletes, all of this is happening for them. And then by the time they get in, they have no idea. So at least everyone should know what visa they're on, what's the purpose of their travel. It's just very important to know at least the very basic.
Right. And then where are you staying? Where are you visiting? You will be asked all of these questions. How long are you staying? And be aware that if you are coming in, say, on a visa waiver, how long can you stay? You know, if you're going to say, I'm going to be here for the next 8 months, and they'll see that you're on a visa waiver, they'll say, I'm sorry, sir, but... So, know how long you are going to be there. If you're traveling as a business visa, I think it's helpful to have letters from a U.S. organization or a meeting or an itinerary.
Well, I think it's also important for those who are coming on those types of visa, O's, L's, even your H's, just read what the immigration attorney has put into your application. The support letters are very important. At least you know what your job title is, how much you're making, who you're working for, where is your, like you said, Mona, where's your location? I think that was one of the best documents you can have and read.
Yeah. And if you're coming in for a party or a wedding or just as a tourist, have your wedding invitation there. Have it printed out, and we'll tell you why in a moment. Have your itinerary there. Oh, we are seeing, Rebecca, aren't we, more and more issues with older people being stopped.
Oh, yeah. So the elderly, I think it's going to be important for them to have health insurance. I think, yeah. So when they're coming in, I think the scare is that as you're getting older, you're more prone to sickness or something happening. And they're afraid of those coming in without insurance. And then, of course, again, it's left to the U.S. government to pick up those costs.
Yeah.
So I think it's also important too, bank statements also to show how are you going to pay for, if you don't have insurance, how can you pay for any medical bills if something goes wrong?
Yeah, of course, if you're coming in to see a sibling or a child, you can always say that they're here and they will, vouch for you. But just be prepared that they could be asking you these type of questions. I think the worst is when people are suddenly confronted with these type of issues and they're shell-shocked and they don't know what to say. So at least if you have some level of preparation, it does help.
Yeah, Simona, I think it's very important for any visitors or anyone coming into the U.S. to be prepared for potential inspections. But, we were talking about printing your invitations, printing your visas, printing everything in your possession. But a lot of us actually don't even have printers anymore, right? A lot of things are all electronic. So why are we advising to print all these documents?
Right. Now, yeah, because the U.S. hates trees? No. Because electronic device searches are now commonplace. And don't think just because you're a U.S. citizen that you're exempt from having your electronics searched.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So this goes for anyone entering the United States, to be prepared. You can be taken aside. You can have your laptop, your phone, anything that can be searched. Under the Fourth Amendment, you have to have a warrant. You can't just go ahead and just seize someone's property without some reasonable cause.
That is true. However, CBP do have the right to look at your devices. So the advice that we are giving you, well, first of all, try and put your phone far, far away. Don't open any apps. CBP cannot ask you to open any apps. So that's an interesting thing, because they might ask you to do that. You don't have to. You actually don't even have to turn your phone on. If you're a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, you do have that right, but then prepare for your device to be seized without a warrant for up to 5 days. And I don't know about you, but I can't do without my phone for 25 minutes, let alone 5 days. If you're a visitor, then if you have a nasty CBP officer, he's just going to turn you around and send you back home again. So just be prepared. So most of the time, you smile and you show them the phone. But again, you do not have to open any apps. The CBP is not allowed to download anything from the cloud. So if you want things, you want to keep your phone and things, put them all on the cloud. You do not have to provide passwords. And you could consider, Rebecca, only traveling with a burner phone.
Who's heard of a burner phone in such a long time? Right?
Well, anybody who watches Breaking Bad, that's for sure.
So those who don't know what a burner phone is, it's just a cheap prepaid phone, right? No commitments, doesn't have any of your apps on there. But is this really practical, Mona? What about all those influencers out there?
Well, forget influencers. Are you going to buy a burner phone? Because I'm certainly not.
No. No, so inconvenient. But at the same time, I think it's important for our listeners out there to know, why is it that the CBP officers are looking at this? Again, the Fourth Amendment gives them an exemption to do reasonable searches, because what are they looking for? They're looking for anyone who has anything on them to identify are there any terrorist activities? Are there any illegal activities that are going to happen in the U.S., such as like selling illegal products in the U.S., or what are you coming in to do? Are you coming in to work on a B1, B2? So that's what they're really looking for. And yes, although they have the right to look at your phone.
They have the right to look at your phone. However, Rebecca, we are seeing officers who are going beyond. If they are seeing cartoons or stuff which is anti-Trump, for example, there's that story of that French professor who was sent back just because he differed in policy, and he made it known through lots of correspondence on his phone that he did not care for the Trump administration's policy on, I believe it was something to do with science.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's where I think there's abuse of discretion from the CBP officers, because instead of looking for national security, meaning terrorist activities, illegal activities, you're now infringing on your First Amendment right of that you can't even say anything or have opinions. So that's where we do say to have phone hygiene.
Right. I mean, look, at the end of the day, you want to come in to the US for a certain reason. We can wax lyrical later on our, amendments and our rights. But at the end of the day, we just want to get through CBP and everything. So exercise intelligent phone hygiene. Put away anything which is obvious if you have that. Do remember, though, that even if you've left your phone on airplane mode, your trash, I believe, recycle bin, deleted folders, they're still accessible in airplane mode. And you shouldn't really keep any information or data or files that you just would not be comfortable on printing. Say it was printed out in a newspaper, or that you don't want to show the US government. Just don't keep it there. Just put it up in the cloud.
Again, we're not trying to scare anyone. We're just giving advice on just being prepared when coming to the US. But speaking on that, Mona, coming into the US, we have more forms again.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
well, not for everybody.
Yes.
Only certain people. So now, who has the latest form, and what letter are we giving that form?
So the new form is a G325R. So do keep that in mind for those who are wanting to spend more than 30 days in the US.
It's coming. It was effective, I believe, April 11th. They did fight it. It was March. And there was a lawsuit, but they didn't win. I think it was Ayla who brought the lawsuit, and they didn't win because they were considered not to have standing. And this really only affects a certain amount of people. It doesn't affect everybody. So, for example, if you're coming in on a business visa like an L1, you don't have to register. And if you're usually if you've come in from an airport, you usually don't have to register. But it really does affect, again, our friends from the north, the Canadian snowbirds this time. So when our Canadian snowbirds are leaving the winter of Canada and driving down to Florida, they're usually here for more than 30 days. They do have to register.
Yes. Yes, everyone has to register. If you're 14 and older, you have to register on your own. Even children have to register. So parents, you be aware that you do need to include your children under the age of 14.
Right. But I believe fingerprint requirement has been waived for your children, and there's fingerprint requirement is waived for Canadians.
Yeah, Mona, it's important for everyone to keep proof of that registration at all times. As I was saying, it's a hassle. For instance, if you're 13 and you're coming in and you're turning 14 within that time period, you then have to re-register. You just have to be mindful of your age and what's going on. I think too many were mentioning those who are not required to register. So, of course, anyone who's a green card holder do not. And it's also important to note that, and this is even for our EB5 listeners out there, anyone who has filed an I-485 you also do not need to register because your biometrics have already been taken through that form.
Right. That's a good segue, which has been more chilling. And that
Yes.
is a number of LPRs, people with green card holders, who are actually being detained at the airport.
I do find that concerning, Mona, because I do have a lot of family members who are coming as tourists and they're saying, oh, we're getting through very quickly. And then on the other hand, you have actual green card holders, permanent residents who are actually getting detained. And why is that?
So the CBP have a manual which they follow. And under that manual, there's lots of rules and regulations in that. There's a number of categories where they are allowed to detain. And many of those categories are really not relevant here. I mean, those categories, for example, someone who's already deported, someone who's involved in illegal activity, somebody who's just, they think is a threat to national security. But those aren't relevant to what we're actually saying. What is relevant is the fact that one of the sections say that if an individual who has a green card has abandoned their lawful permanent resident status, they can be detained. So we are now talking about USCIS looking at people with green cards and believing that at some point they have abandoned the US as their place of residence. This is very troubling for a number of reasons. Now, as we do a lot of EB5, as you know, Rebecca,
Right.
many people don't come here when they get their green card. They want to wait for many reasons. Either they want to wait until their green card is permanent, and that can take years because USCIS is so backlogged, or their parents and they've done the green card for their family and they have no intention of living here. And up till now, we've always said it's fine to come in once every 6 months. But now, under this administration, they're not allowing this once every 6 months anymore. They want to see you here for 180 days, or at least as many days as you can.
There is a discretion, right? So between 6 months and a year, there's a discretion on whether or not what has happened. Was there an emergency? You know, Mona, like for COVID, for instance, we had a lot of clients who were out just because they couldn't travel in. They couldn't get a flight out.
Yeah, but that's actually some of the issues that are coming up.
Yeah.
So we're hearing from other lawyers that people who are out for maybe 11 months during COVID, and maybe they've come in and out since then, but suddenly, because their record has stated that, a CBP officer is saying, wait a minute, 2 years ago, you were out for 11 months, which is very unfair. I know it's not happening across the board, but it is happening.
I would say that my concern wouldn't be so much for those who were out during COVID. I would think that they would see that and use their discretion that this was an emergency situation. Whereas we've had clients 30 years plus on a green card who just travel maybe to come in and see their kids every so often. There may be concern for those.
Yeah, again, it's back to what I said before. The US government doesn't want you to use your green card as a multi-entry visa. They want it to be residency. And the idea that the Trump administration has about this is that, first of all, they see having a green card as an abuse if you're using it as a multi-entry visa. And if they can force you to be here longer, then you will pay more in taxes because you will be here longer. And if it's more than 180 days, the tax bracket is slightly different. And you will spend more money if you're in the United States. So, I mean, that's the idea behind it. How they're tackling it is perhaps far from ideal, to say the least. But let's give some of our clients some advice. What do you do? How do we show the CBP, if you're an LPR, if you have a green card, you're coming in, you want to have your documents. Remember, not on your laptop. Do not open your laptop. Have these printed out. Remember, United States hates trees. So print out your documents. But what should we ask our clients to bring with them?
Oh, yeah. So this is something that we have always, stressed to our clients coming in. If you've been out for some time, or not even if you're just visiting every so often, that bank statements, important, because that shows where are you spending? Do you have credit cards in the United States? Are you spending in the United States?
Well, what if they don't have any bank statements or credit cards? Well, they should open one right now, right?
Yeah, well, they should try. But also important, and which you should be doing as soon as you become a permanent resident, tax returns. You must file tax returns in the United States, whether or not you have earned income in the U.S. So they are looking to see that have you filed, and if you have, and are you claiming worldwide income? So that's very important. And then another one, Mona, that we've always stressed is having a lease.
Yes, yes.
If you don't own a property, at least it's just good enough because it shows that you are a resident here. And I think one of the other important advice that we could give is that when they ask you, when you enter the United States, where is your resident? You need to say the United States.
Yes.
Because as soon as you say another country, then they're going to just automatically assume that you're no longer a resident of the United States.
That you have abandoned your residency, and at that point, they are entitled to detain you and then take you in front of a judge. So that's what we're hearing now. And people, you are then voluntarily giving up their green cards, which they've spent money and time and effort on because they don't want to be detained. So just please, people, be mindful of this. But don't panic. It's not happening everywhere, but it is happening too. Sounds like I'm contradicting myself.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, I would just say speak with us, right? There's ways that we can help if you need to be out of the U.S. for some time period. There are the returning resident visas. There are ways that we can make sure that you have a way of coming back in. So I think it's just very important if you have any questions or concerns that you speak with an attorney to go through your case. It is case by case as well.
Mark, we did ask a number of attorneys which were the best and the worst airports to come in, because we have our own opinion, but we wanted to see if everybody else agreed with us. So again, when we were sending out feelers and getting some more information in and really trying to get as much good information for this podcast as possible, this is what we had almost, and the votes were almost the same across the board. The worst airports in the United States to come in: JFK and Newark.
LAX, which is Los Angeles.
Yeah, Miami. But by far, everybody across the board said that the worst airport to come in through was Toronto Pearson.
And it's not, we asked airports in the U.S. and this came across the board.
I'm clinching. I was like, oh no, please don't be Atlanta. But I'm glad we didn't make the list.
Yeah, but that actually brings us to a good point, Rebecca, because you can do your immigration outside of the U.S. And if, for example, you're an LPR, I think we would definitely recommend you doing immigration outside of the U.S. because you cannot be detained. You can only be detained if you are in the U.S. So if you do it outside, there are some airports like Dublin, for example, or Abu Dhabi.
Or Germany. Yeah, so I would say do look at airports where you have pre-clearance.
Yeah, but I have heard from a number of attorneys that another pre-clearance one is the Bahamas, and that's actually not so great.
Really?
Yeah.
So, go take a vacation in the Bahamas, but not so much. Again, I think, Mona, this goes back to just being prepared, whether it's knowing your visa, whether it's being prepared with paper documents rather than electronic documents, being prepared, like having phone hygiene, exercising phone hygiene, or, what airports you're coming through. All this is important.
Or if you're driving across the border, are you better off going all the way to Detroit and going across rather than Rainbow Bridge for Canadians? But the Canadians who are driving across are just saying that they're being detained for maybe an hour or 2 hours, and it's just taking longer. But overall, we're not hearing of a lot of bad things about the driving. We're hearing worse things about Toronto Pearson as opposed to driving. So maybe that is the way to go.
Mona and Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the time to do what is a very timely and relevant show on the travel information and the concerns that people have, whether they're perceived or whether they are real. Lots of great advice. Come to the U.S. if you really need to. And if you do, print all your itinerary, print out all your supporting information, know what visa you're traveling on, if you're traveling on a visa, and just don't hand Custom Border Patrol your unlocked phone with all your social media apps and email and everything, pointing out your wedding reservation, and then they flip through all your other apps. Don't do that. Print it out. Thank you for being with us today on Global Investment Voice. Do you want to get the most out of global migration and citizenship opportunities? Then head on over to our website at globalinvestmentvoice.com. From there, you can easily search and stream from hundreds of podcast episodes, as well as stay current with the latest migration news and investment opportunities by joining our insider newsletter. The topics presented in this podcast are informational in nature only and are not to be taken as specific legal, financial, or investment advice. Mona, Rebecca, and their legal staff can be reached at mshawlaw.com or by calling their New York office at 212-233-7473.